rules. Money rules. Money. Welcome to the Money Rules Podcast, where we tackle your personal financial matters with leading financial advisors. Your host, Boitumelo Ntsoko.
Many people underestimate the costs involved in managing their estates after their passing, which can lead to liquidity shortfalls and financial strain for their family. Today, we're joined by Jordaan, who is a certified financial planner at Crue Invest, and we'll explore the steps to accurately calculate estate liquidity and mitigate potential financial risks for your loved ones. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the invite.
To kick things off, let's discuss the concept of estate liquidity. Can you explain what it means and why it's essential for estate planning?
Yes, estate liquidity is quite an important part of estate planning, and what it refers to is the amount of cash or assets that you have in your estate that can easily be turned into cash. And the reason why that is important is that it enables the estate and the winding up of the estate to take place in a smooth and orderly fashion, as assets, etc., that's in the estate does not have to be sold to create that liquidity at a later stage and create potential delays.
So what are the key steps for individuals to take to assess their estate's liquidity?
I think the place to start is really to have a good understanding of what the actual assets and liabilities are that's in the estate. So sit down, and make a list of exactly what those assets are. On the one hand, where they're situated, how they are invested, or where they're registered. And then secondly, look at what are the types of liabilities that's in the estate, whether that be a bond, outstanding accounts, and so forth. One other aspect also to take into account is to look at the person's will and to look if there are any specific bequests of cash amounts in those wills, because those also need to be taken into account in determining estate liquidity.
And once individuals have a clear picture of their estate's assets and liabilities, the next step is to calculate estate duties. Can you walk us through this process?
Sure. So the calculation of estate duty is quite an important aspect. How you go about this is, again, we start off with the person's assets, and those are assets that need to be taken into account for estate duty. We list those assets, get the values. Next step would then be to deduct from those assets any liabilities that the estate has, any costs that the estate itself needs to pay as well. Those costs will take into account things like executors' fees, taxes, and so forth. Once we deduct those two, we get to what we will call a net estate, and then we will look at any bequests that there are made to a spouse or to any other institution that qualifies as, in terms of the Estate Duty Act, as a deduction. So those will typically be public benefit organizations, etc. And those will then can also be used as a deduction when we calculate estate duty. After that, each individual gets an estate duty rebate of 3.5 million rand. So any assets that's left over at that point in time, the first 3.5 million rand of that will not be estate dutiable. The balance of your estate will then become estate dutiable. So there we would then apply the rates of estate duty to that balance. Up to the first 30 million rand will be taxed at 20%, and anything above that mark of 30 million rand will then be taxed at a rate of 25%.
Eric, what are common misconceptions people have about estate duty, and how can they avoid potential pitfalls?
Yes, so estate duty people often do not take into account assets that does not form part of the estate for that specific purpose, and that we normally refer to assets such as investments you hold within a retirement fund, within a living annuity, so your pension that's was transferred into a living annuity once you've retired from a retirement fund. Those type of assets do not form part of your estate duty calculation. And then also any bequest that you've made to your spouse also does not form part or is a deduction for estate duty. So it's a lot of times estate duty is a tax that can be deferred until the passing of the last surviving spouse.
Now that we've discussed calculating estate duty, let's focus on ensuring estate liquidity. How can individuals address liquidity shortfalls and provide financial security for their loved ones?
Yes, so the first obvious way of providing for liquidity is obviously if you do have sufficient investments, funds in money market accounts, etc., that can be used to pay those costs. Alternatively to that, a person can use life insurance, which is often used product to provide estate liquidity. So there you could ensure that the insurer pays a set amount into your deceased estate that provides immediate cash that can pay all these costs and liabilities that's in the estate.
Are there any other considerations individuals should keep in mind when structuring life insurance policies for estate planning purposes?
Yes, the one consideration to take into account is that any life insurance that's taken out on your life will be included as what we call a deemed asset in your estate. So there could potentially be estate duty implications on that policy. So that's the one aspect to take into account. A further aspect that to take into account is who you appoint as the beneficiary of that life policy, because that nomination will then determine where the funds actually will be paid to. And if it's not paid to the estate, whether or not that person will then be able to apply those funds to pay into the deceased estate to settle specific costs.
Eric, just as we're wrapping up, are there any final estate planning tips that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, really, as you could hear, estate planning is quite a complex matter, and it's really important that you do this exercise in a comprehensive manner and get the advice of a professional involved to make sure that your estate is structured correctly and that there's no unnecessary delays when the winding up process of your estate needs to take place.
All right, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, Eric.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity.
That was Eric Jordaan, who is a certified financial planner at Crue Invest.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Money Rules Podcast. To listen to more, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.